All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. We are on our third week celebrating the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and this week is focused on using strong passwords and the use of Password Manager. Joining with us, we have Marcus Ke, Interware's head of GRC, and Raghav Khosla, LastPass Staff Solutions Consultant, to discuss about our topic on password management in the evolving workplace. Without further ado, Marcus, the floor is yours.
Hello again, everybody. Hope everyone's having a great month so far. I'm sure everybody's definitely not sick to see my face after seeing me about 3 webinars in a row, but I'm very happy this month to talk about passwords. And along with me, no better of a partner. Do we have a guest speaker today, Raghav, to talk about LastPass? And this is a huge topic, just like last week. Last week when we talked about just general awareness training, passwords actually happens to be the one thing standing between us and an attacker in most cases of social engineering. Of course, there's MFA and other cases too, but all of that LastPass covers for you. So with that introduction being said, let me move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about, again, inware systems. So this is, again, our 39th year in business. I talk about this in most of my webinars, but we deal mainly in cybersecurity, digital transformation. Now, actually, in cybersecurity, we've had a big update so far. We've been having a lot of new business coming in through the form of cybersecurity, because we've recently been approved to be a digital advisor for the government of Canada. So for those of you that may be interested in getting a sponsored grant for doing cybersecurity services with Innerware, please send either me or Camille an email after this webinar, and then we can feel free to talk about it. Okay, so without any further ado, let's talk about, let's start off the presentation with Jimmy Kimmel. Okay, so I'm sure this is not the most expected face you'd see in a password webinar, but actually Jimmy Kimmel has a lot to do with passwords. In fact, he likes to talk about it all the time. For example, in 2015, after the Sony leak, Jimmy Kimmel brought up this new segment of a show called What is Your Password? Same thing again happened in 2017 after the Equifax leak. And essentially what Jimmy Kimmel is trying to do is he's trying to test if people will give out their passwords, especially with a camera in front of them, knowing that it'll be broadcasted to an entire audience. And lo and behold, this is exactly what happened, right? We took out some excerpts of essentially what people did, and they would be an interviewer going down to random people in the street, and they would simply ask them, what kind of password did they use? And they would say, oh, my password is password is my dog's name, and then the year that I graduated university. And okay, so what's your dog's name? Oh, it's Badger. Oh, then what year did you graduate university? Oh, I graduated in 2017. So you're telling me your password is Badger 2017. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So this is bad password practices in play. But with that being said, I mean, this is not entirely uncommon at all, because again, I'm going to bring up the slide here about some common statistics that you can feel free to look at. It's right in front of your screen. I'm just going to talk about some of my favorites. So, for example, 51% of people use the same password for work and personal accounts. It's not too great for a business owner hearing that message. 33% of account compromise victims have stopped doing business with companies and websites that leak their credentials. An analysis of over 15 billion passwords revealed that the average password has 8 characters or less. And bonus point, if you guys have attended the previous webinar on MFA, you'll know that an 8-character password with characters and numbers can get brute forced in a matter of minutes. 53% of people rely on the memory to manage passwords, right? And especially with these ever increasing password requirements, where we say you must have a 12-character password. Sooner or later, it'll be 13 or 14. You can't exactly rely on people's memory to keep memorizing these extremely complex passwords. So then later on, I'll have Raghav tell you guys the perfect solution to that kind of thing is the use of a password vault. So let me bring up a case study, actually. And for those of you that, like games, or maybe if you've heard of the Uber attack a couple weeks ago, Rockstar Entertainment or Rockstar Games has very, very recently, in like just a couple of days ago, they received a massive, massive breach where their new game, Grand Theft Auto 6, had pre-developed footage released to the public. Now, this you can consider this to be a fairly low risk. Obviously, it's damaging to shareholders and the stock, but it doesn't really release anybody's personal information, right? That being said, the attacker had access to all of that because they use social engineering to enter the company. Social engineering is something where, again, we talk about a bad actor, a hacker tries to impersonate somebody good and trick you into giving some sort of information or some sort of credentials to log in, right? Definitely not a good thing. So the lesson learned is really everybody is a target, right? Just because you think, these big companies get attacked doesn't necessarily mean that a small company or a medium-sized company doesn't get attacked. In fact, they're even more targeted these days. Building good policy, we talk about in the GRC team and as part of Anywhere to always build good policy, because policy helps you to identify what is considered professional, what is considered safe. Next up, we talk about moving target. So, before, technology always happens to move forward, right? Unsurprisingly. And you can see here that the power of a processing chip tends to increase, which then forces us as users to ever increase the complexity of our passwords, right? You might have remembered a time where 8-character passwords were safe. Nowadays, not so much. It has to be 12 characters, sometimes even 14 or 16 characters. How do we protect ourselves, right? So this is just an excerpt taken out just as an example. If you were to use the password 1 to 9, this 9-character password, this can get cracked 431 times in the blink of an eye, right? However, if you were to simply add a letter into it, now this data is a little bit old, but it would significantly improve the security of your password. And here, just as an example, it'll get cracked when, Leonardo DiCaprio hits 84 years old. Maybe it's a little bit younger now because, again, the processing power has been increasing based on the Moore's law. But nevertheless, passwords, we always recommend using a password manager, because the more and more complex these passwords become, the more and more difficult you'll find yourself and your employees to manage them safely and effectively. So with that being said, I'm going to pass on over to Raghav Khosla, who is the staff solutions consultant at LastPass. Go ahead, Raghav.
Marcus, thank you. Welcome everybody to today's discussion. Marcus, I have to say I found a couple of aspects of your introduction there very, very interesting. The 8-character password specifically in terms of brute force attacks was something that really resonated with me for reasons that I'll expand upon within the session today. And then also that last slide there about using MFA in addition to password management, basically. So Camille, would you mind moving to the next slide, please? Thank you. So when you think about passwords in the business environment as well as in the personal environment, right? Marcus had some statistics that he was sharing earlier, right? But rather than focusing on the 90% there or the 50 online accounts that one might have, across their personal and business lives, I'd rather actually draw the focus to this concept of reused, common, or weak passwords. Going back to what Marcus was saying, I think we've established that passwords in general need to really actually be scrutinized to the point that you actually are in the habit of understanding what you have in terms of business assets, right, native to your business, but then understanding that the passwords that are potentially assigned to these business assets are potentially very, very weak. So clearly, whether it's a ransomware attack or something like that, or just overall security posture, you generally want to actually think about improving them. Why? Because you don't want to be the next Uber or Sony or Equifax, or for that matter, any other organization that's actually been recently breached and had user data compromised. That being said, the fourth bullet point there, I think, is rather intriguing. If you think about the last couple of years that we've all lived through, right? We've had scenarios where you've had individuals working from home, potentially migrating back to the office, or potentially, going through a hybrid mode. But within this time frame, we've had the same constant challenge of how do I share passwords? It makes no difference to me whether it's a Netflix password or a Hulu password or the Wi-Fi password at the personal level. But what if it's a company credit card? What if it's something a little bit more meaningful to you, the business owners? From this perspective, the issue is still at hand. You're thinking about how you share passwords. But now in this example, obviously, you're talking about business assets. Can we move to the next slide, please, Camille? Thank you. So we've established already, okay, that the passwords are the key to every technical entry point, right? Whether you've got a laptop, whether you've got a smartphone, an iPhone, an Android, whether you've got a Ring network at home, your Wi-Fi network at home, or obviously in the workplace. But when you sit and think about the statistics that are highlighted there right now, okay, and you start to equate them to actual real dollars or real currency, native, right? So from this perspective, this is where it really boils down to educating the masses here with respect to this simplistic password that you may have, going back to what Marcus was saying about 8 characters in length. If that can be hacked in the blink of an eye, and then you start to think about those two values there of 80% and 85%, realizing that we are all human beings here, the potential problem, as we can see, is huge. So the question is, how as you as business owners, how can you get ahead of that curve so that you don't end up becoming one of the statistics in the pool of information held here? Next slide, please, Camille. Thank you. So obviously this is a rhetorical question, right? But I think it highlights the issue quite well. So in this particular example, an individual here probably hasn't actually used a password manager here. Why? Because they're obviously trying to stress the point that I've got a random set of characters, etc. And how am I literally supposed to remember that? And the answer is you're not. Clearly, passwords are part of the problem, but as we'll establish, a password is part of the solution too. Moving along, please, Camille. So, as I've just mentioned, passwords are part of the problem, but they're also part of the solution. And the question is how and why. So when you think about it, okay, what we're talking about here, and Marcus introduced the concept of a vault. I'd like you to think about this. Much in the same way that in a bank, you have a vault and you have 2 keys in order to access the content held in the security deposit box in the vault. Well, from that perspective, okay, you have a key and the bank individual also has a key. In combination of using both of those keys, the information that's held in the security deposit box is made accessible. So from that perspective, you as an individual, you as a business owner, you have one portion. You have that password that provides you access in to LastPass, hence the fact that they're actually part of the solution. Moving along, please. But here's a challenge that I'd like you to consider in terms of the experience. So you as business owners, okay, and again, drawing back to what Marcus was sharing about sort of compliance-related needs within your market there, I think it's really interesting, right, when you consider, okay, as a business, we need to protect our assets. We need to secure them, right? So that talks to me about individual accounts. Maybe it's Office 365, maybe we're talking about some specific websites. It could be Salesforce, it could be namely Workday, or some other applications that your employees are using day to day. So the audits, the compliance aspects about putting in some restrictions about how your employees access that day to day is absolutely a challenge in terms of actually implementing. But in addition to that, you also want to think about implementing a solution that's going to be very, very intuitive. I was on a call earlier this morning today with a senior member of our management team, and the individual made a very accurate comment about how many people actually read email. And if you think about it, day to day, from the litany of devices that we have available to us and how much information that we're actually able to absorb, how many of us genuinely click over the send the link and make sure that the individual that, supposedly sending us an email is the individual in question? Again, the breaches seem to suggest that, that doesn't happen that often. Rather, people do click on things. But that highlights the point about you need a solution in place that's easy to use. So let me give you an example. I have my iPhone here. This same phone that I use day to day holds my LastPass personal vault. It has information in there that I'm leveraging LastPass to create completely randomly generated complex and secure passwords to access all the different websites that I use day to day. But in addition to that, I use the same phone to access information within my business environment, within LastPass. Through that mechanism, it's actually an MFA experience to access key applications and things like that. So the key takeaway here is simplicity. But now, as the slide illustrates there, how do you find the right balance between your security needs and then the simplicity? Next slide, please. So this is where we start to explore that. So working from the left to the right, I've just mentioned about simplicity. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to be easy for an end user, irrespective of technical expertise or, like just any sort of exposure to tech. It needs to be intuitive and easy. So from this perspective, as you can literally see, not surprisingly, as you do with apps day to day, you might open up a browser on your phone or whatever. You might go to Google and type in LastPass space app. You get the download come straight down onto your phone, right, via 5G or via Wi-Fi. And now all of a sudden you've got access into this application. You'll create a username and you'll create a master password, right, as we've discussed. But the minute that you've done that, now your digital profile, your digital world changes. Because now what you can start to think about doing is accessing that vault that you've just accessed or created on your smartphone, on your MacBook, your laptop, your tablet, or even on a desktop, should you so desire. Meaning that LastPass as a solution, it's browser OS and device agnostic, as I've just mentioned. Now, in addition to that, when you've actually started to use LastPass, okay, you're leveraging some of the save and fill capabilities. Because again, we're thinking about simplicity, right, to the end user. Now, drawing your attention to the middle part there, the password manager. This is where it really gets interesting. You as the conscientious business owner here, what I'd like to imagine, okay, is this. You're interested in implementing some policies in place to meet some compliance standards or to meet some audit requirements based upon, I don't know, some testing or something that you might have had done in your environment, or perhaps you have a cyber insurance related renewal that's coming up and you need to actually think about implementing some changes to meet said renewal. But in addition to that, outside of those aspects, you're also thinking about implementing policies with respect to how your employees are doing their day-to-day work within the business. These are all aspects in terms of the password management solution that definitely come to my mind, certainly when I put myself in your shoes. Lastly, on the right-hand side there, the encryption. So I mentioned, or I used an analogy earlier about a user going to the bank and, with a key and another key, accessing a security deposit box in a vault. I'd like you to literally think about that now in terms of LastPass. So in this environment, okay, this bank, this security vault, obviously it's a digital solution. It lives in the LastPass environment, in our network, right? But the encryption that goes behind it, this AES 256 military grade encryption that basically is only ever accessible using a combination of those two keys. That key is one key is your username, and most importantly, your master password or passphrase, right? And hopefully it's going to be probably 30 to 40 characters in length, and it's more a series of events noted just to you, because it's important to stress here, nobody other than you, the individual that's participating on this webinar today, knows the account access that you've created to access your account. I don't know it. Nobody knows it, okay? It's just you. But that information, okay, that you utilize to gain access into your account can be coupled with MFA. So again, going back to what Marcus was mentioning earlier in a previous webinar, you guys had a session about MFA. We always recommend that for any user accessing their vault, please enable MFA. It's just that second line of defense. But now using that master password or passphrase coupled with the information held in LastPass, that encryption and decryption process is requiring both aspects for the content of the vault to be made accessible. But now moving to the last bullet there about rules and policies. Maybe you have an employee, I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. Maybe you have an employee that's in a different time zone, a different time zone, different continent, different country, different state, different city. Maybe you want to think about implementing things like geofencing, right, based upon a certain location. Maybe you want to restrict it to a certain IP address range. You can get extremely granular with respect to how you're providing access simply for a user to gain access into their vault. So a combination of all of these three elements ultimately means that you as the business owner, you want to lock down your environment, but you want your employees to actually start using the solution in place. Next slide, please, Camille. So this leads us to introducing LastPass. So what you can see in the middle of the screen there, okay, are two GUIs that basically represent the user experience, whether it's on a smartphone or whether it's actually in the vault. The key takeaway here, though, is this. In order for me to access perhaps Google on the iPhone there, I simply click on the actual Google icon and I'm given the option to launch it. Similarly, on the screen behind there, if I want to access perhaps, gosh, I don't know, Salesforce, I would actually just click on that as well. And I have the option to basically have LastPass auto-populate my username and my credentials associated to this particular website. That LastPass has been used to generate a 99 character length password. So for me, I literally just click. That's all I need to worry about doing. Next slide, please, Camille. So let's think about what now in terms of like being the #1 password manager. What does that mean? Well, it talks about security, as we've already discussed, right? Going back to thinking about the combination of your master passphrase coupled with accessing the information that's held in LastPass and the encryption and the decryption process, additionally coupled with using MFA. Now, from that perspective alone, okay, knowing that theoretically you could consider implementing what we refer to as a passwordless experience. For those of you on the call today, think of it like this. If you have a banking application on your smartphone, and in order to access that particular banking application, you have to use facial recognition, touch, or a swipe on your phone, that process can now be provisioned and applied to accessing your LastPass vault. So now what that means is you're tying your access into the phone, right? Into that biometric experience that so many of us are already very, very familiar with. Convenience. I mentioned earlier about being browser device and OS agnostic. Many customers that I interact with have employees that are running Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever, and using smartphones and iPhones and tablets, etc. So the modern workforce, you need some sort of access pretty much on any kind of device. To me, compliance is a massive thing. Again, all of the breaches, what they seem to suggest is the fact that, okay, how do I prove that I'm compliant in order to meet security needs around cyber insurance, right? Those policies from Cowbell and not TransUnion, Travelers rather, right? Those kinds of organizations. How do you meet those compliance standards? And lastly, scalability, a solution that can actually be implemented, adding and dropping users at will based upon the business needs. Marcus, over to you, please.
Thank you, Raghav. And actually, I just want to bounce off of a point that Raghav just mentioned, which was compliancy, right? So that kind of takes us into this next slide of why do you want to pick Interware and why do you want to pick LastPass? Compliancy is where you begin, right? Because as a business owner, you should always be compliant. In whatever field or industry that you work in, you have to check, first of all, what are the regulatory needs of what your business has. And then you have to create policy for it, right? Because there's no point in just saying you're compliant. You need to make what's implicit explicit. And by doing that, you must create policy. Now, policy is what turns your employees from just regular employees into professionals. And in the context of passwords, that's what you need to first start off with. And that's something that Interware can help you with. We can bring up passwords. We have password policies that dictate what is a secure and what is a secure password and what constitutes secure practices. And it almost always, if not always, leads to using LastPass. So by working together with both Interware and LastPass, you can have the convenience of using the password manager Time saved from creating the policies yourself, stronger security overall, greater cost savings from working with us, and last but not least, policy and regulatory compliance. I hope that makes sense. I'll pass it on back to Raghav here.
Thank you, Marcus. So for the next few minutes, what we're going to do now is have a discussion about what that experience might look like for an end user who's never used LastPass before. Quite literally, think of it from this point of view. So you as a client of Interware, basically, you would have a LastPass instance stood up, and an individual or a series of individuals, users or groups or whatever, would be invited to activate the invitation emails that they received from LastPass, and you would create a blank vault. So I put this question to all of you on the call today. If you currently have a spreadsheet, perhaps, that was me before I joined LastPass 3 years ago. I've worked in tech for a long time, but yeah, I thought that I had this really super duper spreadsheet, and invariably it turned out that it wasn't the case. But if that happens to be you or an employee of your organization, that's a risk to your organization. So in addition to that, though, okay, you're also thinking about, or you're contending with employees that are using Chrome Password Manager. That's a very common instance that we run into. And then lastly, obviously, perhaps you have some employees that are actually having an existing free LastPass account, or perhaps are using a different solution. The key takeaway from what you're looking at on this screen is that irrespective of the source, we're giving you the ability to take that initial source data and ultimately upload it into LastPass. Why are we suggesting this? Well, in terms of best practices, and you think about standardizing and increasing adoption across your organization, this is one mechanism that allows you to do so. Next slide, please, Camille. So this vault that you're looking at is actually an illustration of my vault, quite literally. And so I want to draw your attention to the fact that after I've run that import wizard from the previous slide, now my vault is populated with these items. Now, what's interesting, okay, on this particular slide here is the fact that I'll draw your attention to the business section in the middle of the screen and the 3 Microsoft icons. Hopefully, you'll notice that there are red exclamation points next to each of those Microsoft, or rather within each of those Microsoft instances. What's interesting about this, okay, is the fact that LastPass is actually providing that information to me as an end user, right? After I'm actually accessing my vault, having run the import, now LastPass is actually reporting this. The question is, what is the significance of this? And we'll discuss that on the next slide, please, Camille. So every single user of LastPass, okay, gains access to their vault and obviously has the ability to have their import done and then have an analysis done through the security dashboard. The security dashboard in of itself introduces some interesting concepts. Firstly, okay, the dark web monitoring. I found it intriguing actually when Marcus was referring to Sony and Equifax back in 2017. When I sit and think about how we received notifications of breach issues in 2017, certainly from Equifax, there is a high probability that a user may well have received a physical letter in the post, right, in the mail, saying to them that, your email address or you were part of a breach, etc., and our organization is providing you, I don't know, $500,000 worth of security and identity protection, etc. I know that happens now, but 5 years ago, I wonder if that still occurred. Now, that being said, this dark web monitoring right now means that if that issue were to occur, okay, if you had an email address that was part of a breach, all right, and in that instance, okay, you were concerned about it, LastPass will not only email you as an individual, right, immediately, I should note, it will also email the actual admins associated to your organization. So that would mean that Interware, in this particular instance, would be receiving notifications based upon the fact that one of your employees has actually had a compromise associated to the dark web. Now, that being said, if I draw your attention to the right-hand side of the screen where it says you have no alerts, clearly that's what you want. However, in the event of an alert, not only will the user receive said email notification, but they'll also have the option to actually correct the issue within that section that I'm just drawing your attention to. So natively, everything is driven, so to speak, from the vault. Now, with those two items out of the way, I'd like to draw your attention to where it says security score. You might argue that 88.1% with a high safety rating is pretty good. For me, as a cybersecurity professional, I would argue and say that, no, I actually don't think it's very good. You kind of want upper 95 and, towards 100%. Why? Because when I think about at-risk passwords, I think about basically ransomware attacks. I think about dollars. What's the impact? To me, as a personal user of LastPass, we actually have a family's account at home, and I'll touch upon that shortly, but also in the business environment. So that red rectangle that's highlighting or highlighted there, it's drawing attention to the fact that there have potentially been 14 passwords that have been reported as having issues. And by issues, I mean after the import has been executed, LastPass has performed an analysis of all of the passwords and will report back to the employee as well as the admins, i.e. Interware again, and ultimately probably to you, which employees may well have duplicate passwords, weak passwords, or missing passwords. So we've established the need for complex passwords. But now what we're saying is, let's say that 2 weeks in after you deploy LastPass, you have this analysis run. 2 weeks in, I would probably want to know what my ROI is with respect to LastPass. How well are my employees actually leveraging this solution within the environment that's ultimately going to increase security and reduce risk? That's an interesting point, which we'll explore on the next slide, please, Camille. So to that end, I'd like to draw your attention to these these highlighted items here in red in the middle of the screen there. So we've established, right, that basically weak passwords, duplicate passwords, and interestingly, duplicate passwords apply to more than 3 sites. When you stop and think about the amount of breaches that have occurred, we know with some firmness here that yes, this still exists, right? But in addition to that, the very last point there, the unresolved dark web monitoring alerts, goes back to what I was saying about if if an email address is compromised in a breach. So for me, here is what I would like you to consider. You deploy LastPass at the beginning of December, for argument's sake. 2 weeks in, okay, after you've deployed LastPass to address those challenges in place, you actually have this report generated as part of a project lifecycle. Maybe it's a monthly thing, maybe it's bi-weekly, maybe it's a QBR type approach. Your objective as the business owner here is clearly to have an impacted use count of 0 or single digit, but preferably 0. Why? Well, obviously we've established those reasons. So in a nutshell, when you sit and think about the fact that what LastPass is introducing, right, we talked about passwords in general. We talked about the fact that you can apply these passwords to the business side of the environment as well as the personal side of the environment. This is a segue introducing something that every user of LastPass as a business user gains access to. We have this concept of families as a benefit, which quite literally means that every business user gains access to an additional 5 licenses. So now what you're hoping to achieve here basically is improved password behavior across both aspects, right? Both the personal aspect as well as the business aspect, irrespective of what happens to be the actual driving force behind meeting the end goals. With that, I'll pass back to Marcus and Camille, please.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Raghav and Marcus. As you all may already know that this month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and as your chosen managed service provider, we are opening a limited time 14-day trial offer with LastPass so that you can get access to their security vault and assess your security score in their dashboard. During this trial offer, you will see how LastPass will indeed make your workplace more convenient, productive, and secure. To avail of this 14-day trial offer, please kindly email me at ccob@interware.ca so you can start this offer today. We will be the one setting this up for you, and we highly, highly recommend acquiring this trial offer with us. Next month, we are covering a different topic on how you can get the government to sponsor you for your next cybersecurity project. If you're interested, watch out for more details on this webinar this week, and we hope to see you there.